Hey, today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by the good folks over at Growers & Co. Growers & Co. is the brainchild of my buddy Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, who has created a tool and apparel company with a focus on small-scale farming. Since I've known JM, he has been working on this idea, and I have to say he and his team have completely knocked it out of the park. Truly, Hannah and I have been rocking our Moskovich vest a ton already this winter. I jammed the brandy wine straw hat in the summer. All of the apparel is well made and well fitted and built for exactly the kind of work we talk about on this podcast. But Growers & Co. is more than clothes and tools. They are also launching a biannual magazine that is dedicated to the culture of small-scale farming. So learn more about all of those good things at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you by Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software gives you the tools you need to manage your entire sales process. Built specifically for farmers' needs, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, increase efficiency, and provides flexibility for working seamlessly with your whole customer base. Our free account includes features for sharing your real-time and coming soon product availability, as well as the option to create an availability calendar to inform buyers about your product's seasonality. Free accounts also include access to Farmers Web's how-to guides, offering pro tips and best practices on selling online to individual buyers, as well as how to work with such buyers as restaurants, schools, and stores. A 1-month free trial is available for the paid account, which includes all features to manage customers and orders, including accepting online credit card sales, handling advanced pickup or delivery orders, giving select buyers special pricing and payment terms, tracking your buyers' payments, keeping detailed sales records, and much more. Even manage orders and payments for buyers not placing their orders online. Request a demo and learn more at farmersweb.com.
All right. Huge thanks to our show supporters. Now let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, Episode 12, Season 3. Got a really great farm chat for you today with a farm that you're really going to want to keep an eye on because Green Things Farm Collective are doing some of the coolest stuff in this space. You'll remember that Jackson caught up with Jill, Hannah, and Michelle back in the summer to talk about the collaborative part of Green Things. But with this one, I caught up with Eric Campy and Nate Latta of Green Things to get a rundown on the production side. And I'm really impressed with this operation. They do about 3 acres in production and manage that using lots of deep mulches and wood chips in the pathways. And we talk about how they do all of that efficiently. We talk about their many different enterprises, seed saving, and just a whole bunch else. It's such a great conversation. If you have not checked out our other new podcast, No-Till Flowers, go look that up. This week it was with Ellen Polishuk of Plant to Profit, talking about soil testing and microbes and all sorts of good stuff. So just search that on your whatever podcast platform you listen to this on. It's No-Till Flowers. All right. I think that's enough for me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Nate and Eric of Green Things Farm Collective. Eric Campy and Nate Latta, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks.
Great to have you all here. I'm super excited because we got a little bit of a rundown of your farm cooperative from Jill and Hannah and Michelle this summer for our summer short series. But for those of our listeners who are just kind of jumping in, can you catch us up? Give us some of the details. How big is the farm? How many acres are you working on there and those sorts of things?
So we're here on the north side of Ann Arbor, really close to the city limits, and we have 64 acres that we own and another 40 adjacent to us that we're leasing. And of that, about 40 is wooded and mixed hardwoods. And then of the 60 rough tillable, we've got about 5 acres. We're in a conservation easement, our land is, so we basically sold the development rights in exchange for cheaper land. And we maintain 5 acres sort of a building envelope where we can build barns and other infrastructure, our house. So that's about 5 acres of that, roughly 64, we'll call it. And then of the other sort of roughly 60 open acres, we've got about 20 in hay, dedicated hay field for our cattle. We've got about 25 acres of pasture, and then a bunch of headland space and sort of, open fields, some wetter areas in there, some low spots. And then we've got a little over, about 3 acres of field space, encompassing something like 220-ish 100-foot by 30-inch beds. And then we've got about a 1/4 acre. We've got two under plastic. We've got 230 by 192 hoop houses and a couple small random kind of 15 roughly foot hoops for mixed use. And then we've got a 30 by 96 greenhouse that is both kind of seed work space and then propagation space that's heated for our plants, for our nursery. Yeah, that's kind of the rough breakdown. And then we've got about a 1/4 acre in cut flower.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so many. Can you kind of give us, maybe Eric, if you want to take this one, give us a rundown of the enterprises, or fill in any details that we missed there?
And I would even add to it, we have a 3/4 acre field that's on a separate property that we were growing seed on this year. And then there's a very small part of my front yard in town that's also done for seed work. And we're consolidating that seed work to the main property starting next year, or at least most of it. And then, Jesse, you were asking about the business. What's interesting about our business is we're a collective or a collaborative farm that you spoke about in the summer short. There's 5 of us who are equal owners of this enterprise, and we officially formed that venture, I guess, last winter. And it was a group of 5 of us who we all knew each other, and we'd all been farming in the community for a number of years. And we came together just to sort of be a stronger farm together, to sort of share the work and responsibility, and to be able to lean on each other's strengths. And so this year has really been our first year working together in that way, and it's been a roller coaster. It's been really exciting. On top of all of the interesting natures that 2020 has been with COVID and all, it's really been great to be part of a team in this year that I suspect has been really challenging and isolating for a lot of farmers, and to not be going it alone this year. At least I can speak for myself. That's been really huge.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we've started to put a lot more focus on the collaboration side of farming for that reason, because there've definitely been moments this year where Hannah and I, we dropped back on having employees. We actually kind of did go it alone because of kind of what we didn't know about COVID at the time. So it would have been so nice to have a team that was kind of built into the farm. So I think that I love kind of extracting what you all are doing for that reason, to get that information out there and show people a model. And I want to talk more about that, kind of how you all manage that. But can you give us first, maybe, like, you mentioned some seeds and some flowers. Can you give us the kind of run the gamut on, like, what all the enterprises are?
Oh, sure. I can take a stab at it, and maybe Nate can fill in the gaps. We're primarily a produce operation, and we're selling our produce through we have an online marketplace through Barn to Door that that actually has been really excellent in this COVID year, because folks were able to pre-purchase whatever they'd like, and then we'd package that for them and set it out at our farm stand for them to pick up at their convenience. And that allowed sort of a contact-free exchange. You're not handling money, and you don't have to be face-to-face. We also were doing the local farmers market, the Saturday farmers market in town in Ann Arbor. We have a CSA. We have kind of one that is sort of a by the pound sort of fall CSA, and then we have these shorter seasoned salad club and spinach club CSAs, and that's sort of tuned in for folks that are looking for leafy greens over the winter or for a few weeks in the spring or summer. We also have a seed business on our own label, so we save seeds and we package them and sell them through an online website and on our own rack. So a rack that we can bring to market or display racks that we can send out to local retailers. We have a herd of beef cattle, and so we have beef, which was very easy to sell in a COVID year. We have cut flowers that fits in with our produce sales online and at the market. Goodness, am I missing something, Nate?
Let's see. The cut flowers. We also have a U-pick CSA where people come out to the farm, which was awesome this year for people to get outside and sort of be on their own in a farm setting. U-pick CSA. And then we also sell some produce to an aggregated CSA through a hospital locally, and that reaches about, roughly 300 families or community members. And so we do some specific crops kind of targeted at a larger scale towards that CSA. And we also have a small program where we're sending some food out to a local food bank and providing a way for community members to sort of purchase food towards that end, where we can donate it on other people's behalf. And we're sort of feeling out that program, as well as offering some food out to our community through sort of just a donated share box. So it feels like most everything. We've got some random side hustles.
We have some restaurant accounts. I think in a normal year, that'd be a bigger part of our business, but we do have some restaurants that continue to buy from us this year. And there's also a consignment-based grocery in town that's been actually a really excellent partner for us and other small farms.
That's
so you
amazing.
can see there's a lot going on, and that's why it takes 5 of us to try and get our heads around it.
Yeah, that's so extensive. I mean, the size of the farm, the different operations, all the different enterprises. I'm curious about that U-pick CSA. So there's basically like 3 CSA models there. You said the one that's kind of the salad greens, then you have the one that's kind of prepackaged, and then you have a U-pick. Is that correct?
It's not a U-pick, it's sort of a choice by the pound.
Oh, okay. I misheard that then.
U-pick is just for cut flowers. So people actually come out and can essentially make their own bouquet, and we call that U-pick CSA for cut flowers. And then the free choice model we've been doing for a number of years now, and basically we harvest things loose, and including things that normally you'd see bunched like kale or Swiss chard or turnips or kind of normally bunched things that you sell in a unit. And we basically bring everything out in bulk, kind of on a buffet line. And folks come in into the space, and there's scales, and we give them a weekly weight, sort of depending on the season and the week and the offerings. And they can take whatever they want in whatever increments they want up to that weight. And then we usually pull aside things that don't kind of fit well with the weight model. A squash might just be considered a pound for weighing sake. And then we also usually add herbs and kind of some specialty items that also don't translate well to weight and value that we put on we call it a bonus bench that people get in addition to what they choose. And so that really is let people get exactly what they want from us. And surprisingly, it also has worked out really well. It averages out surprisingly well what people take. And so we find that we don't tend to, be skewed all towards the highest value crops. And it also helps that we do it in fall only, where a lot of the crops are storage crops and are already harvested. All root crops, things like potatoes and squash and carrots and beets are things that we can just kind of pull out of the cooler and are ready every week. And then we follow that CSA with our weekly market. And so we're able to repurpose anything that's left over that might have been a fresh harvest and push it out at market and kind of evaluate the CSAs on a Thursday. On a Friday, we would reevaluate what sort of went out and what additionally we want to harvest to bring to market. And then we can usually push all of that really effectively. And people are generally very thrilled with the CSA. We have awesome retention rate, and people who are in it tend to love it. So that's been a cool model we've been doing for about 5 years.
Yeah, that's cool. I like having different options like that. The choose your own has been the way that we did it for a very long time, and people loved that. And you get a variety of people who like different versions of the CSA, but it's cool to be able to offer that one. It's also helpful for the farmer. Can you give us a little bit of your all's history? Like, how did each of you get into farming? How does, what was, maybe even start with you, Eric. How did you get into farming?
Sure. I was an engineer in a past life, and I started volunteering on farms because I wanted to be outside more, and I wanted to work with my hands more, and I wanted to be more involved in the food that I ate. And I started volunteering on farms, and then I just started working on farms, and it was a slippery slope, and I fell into it. And it was I was living in Colorado at the time, and it was sort of by lucky chance that I was working for an organic produce farm that was also a seed farm. And this was Abundanza Organic Seeds and Produce at the time outside of Boulder. And they were, not just growing beautiful organic produce, but their seed operation was pretty large. My mentor, Richie, was a field manager when Seeds of Change was getting established. And when he took that on his own, he was doing seeds kind of on his own label, but he was also doing seeds on contract for other of the national seed companies. And so at a real early point in my exposure to organic farming, I was involved in seed work, and I found it just so beautiful. The way that you can see the crop through its entire life cycle. So not just growing a green to grow the leaf and harvest it and then turn it under or whatever. You let it go bloom and go all the way to seed. And so I just found that to be really inspiring. And so when we moved back to Michigan, I started my own small farm that was focusing on seed saving. And I called it Ann Arbor Seed Company. And so when I joined as a part of the Green Things Farm Collective here, that's sort of the puzzle piece that I brought. I think maybe trying to not go too long here, the other thing that I think from a no-till perspective, we were all sort of dabbling in different no-till techniques. And I was working at a small scale. I was at 3/4 of an acre, and it didn't make sense for me to invest in machinery. I didn't have a tractor. It was also difficult to get access in the field that I was. And so that lent itself really well towards using dark silage tarps and billboard tarps for occultation. since tillage was hardly an option for me, smothering with tarps made a lot of sense. And I was also very interested in a lot of the deep mulch techniques. At first, I wasn't doing much with deep compost, but I was doing a lot of mulching after a plant was transplanted or a direct sown crop was established. And that the mulching lends itself to seed work pretty well because a lot of your crops, pretty much all of your crops, are longer season crops. And so, like a head of lettuce that could be a 30-day or a 40-day crop will be a full season, planted in April and harvest till the end of August. And so it suddenly makes sense to mulch with straw or leaves or whatever. Anyway, so it really feels to me like the no-till method is a no-brainer for anyone who's operating at an acre or less. Just how well it works from a price point and just accessibility. And so now that I'm at this sort of larger scale with the team here, it's really interesting to me seeing how equipment can enable no-till method. Like, it's not just a method for small acreage growers. I think it makes a lot of sense I don't know if we're not big, but we're not small either. I don't know what it is. I worry I rambled there. Did that make sense?
No, it's great. I mean, you're definitely I love that you kind of brought that from the, working the small scale seed to up and getting it up to, what you all are doing at 3 acres now. And I do want to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm wondering though, Nate, how did you get into it? Was your background in agriculture at all?
No, my background was in environmental restoration, restoration ecology, and that was sort of the work I was doing out of the university. I did some environmental studies in college, and then but I had a taste of my grandparents. My grandfather was a large animal vet, and he and my grandma lived on 40 acres in southern Wisconsin. And when I was sort of having a bit of an educational crisis, I took a year off of school when I was 20 years old and spent some time in Alaska fishing, and then moved in with my grandparents, who I was fairly close with, and grew some. There was a big market gardener in their town, and he sort of came out and just plowed 5 acres for me and planted a bunch of sweet corn and for me and peas and I bought transplants off him and just went for it without having any idea what I was doing. And it was sort of a kind of 5 acres on my own scale, which was insane.
Wow.
But it was kind of neat. I just brought food to a market, signed up for some small markets, and just took an old van and brought produce, and people bought food that I was growing, and it was pretty empowering to see, to be a creator and to be my own boss. And so I had that sort of that itch after that experience, and so began looking for land in sort of after I graduated college, and then met Jill a couple years after I graduated, and we started dreaming together about just buying some land and starting something. And we didn't really know what, and we didn't really know how or why, except that it sort of seemed dreamy. And we started our farm right after Jill graduated college at an incubator program that sort of was the first year for the incubator program, and provided land and a little bit of basic infrastructure and some basic equipment. The idea being to kind of jumpstart small farms. And in our case, it worked. And we had a 2-year tenure there. And our second year farming, we bought this 64 vacant acres just a couple miles away, and without a tractor or any infrastructure, electricity, and we basically just started building and haven't really stopped since. And I think for me, my sort of venture into no-till was this area is plagued with heavy, hard soil with poor drainage. And the reason that the land we bought was still just sort of a conventional field for ag and not developed into houses or farmed, by someone locally, is because of poor drainage. And so as we sort of scaled up, looking at what people were doing around us, you see a lot of tractors and you see a lot of tillage, and we sort of went down that road and on already depleted soils, and nothing really got better. And despite our commitment to sort of organic practices, we didn't really understand what carbon, how to put carbon into the soil. We were struggling to grow cover crops because nothing was really growing well. We didn't really understand fertility. We didn't have any formal training. So over time, talking, Eric and I, had become good friends, and we would go on runs together and talk about our woes of farming, and drainage, water management became a big, paramount issue for both of us that sort of was coming to the forefront that we'd have to deal with. And so we both sort of started working on different strategies, and he sort of went down no-till and I sort of went raised bed to deal with water. And we started seeing much better results as we could kind of grow above water and start moving it away from our fields. And then that sort of became an issue with weed pressure and how you deal with weed management in sort of a raised bed system. And we really hated the idea of using plastic mulch. And also we had sort of grown to a scale where we were growing, I don't know, maybe more like 5 or 6 acres of produce, sort of with tillage. And it's sort of hard to imagine how to scale some of the no-till practices, when you're looking at growing produce on that scale. And we weren't tooled up in that direction. So it was sort of a puzzle for me of how to transition. And it wasn't until we really put a huge investment into some compost on the farm that we started seeing, a pathway forward, as we saw sort of the mulching effect that and the weed suppression that no-till kind of let us achieve. It sort of started to free up some labor hours to deal with the other issues and pathways. And then we got more sophisticated with mulching and pathway management with wood chips and more sophisticated with trenching and digging drainage ditches, mostly by hand, to keep water away from our fields. And, it was sort of this slow process where Eric and I were going back and forth a lot, talking about strategies to improve our farms. And we sort of have been leaning in really heavily for a couple of years now, and seeing really fantastic results. And yeah, that's sort of, but everything has just sort of been, there's some real advantages and disadvantages to never having worked or really spent time on any other farms. And I think, it's plays to our strengths and weaknesses, both Jill and I, and that's sort of one of the reasons why bringing on some other partners really expanded our horizons and some of the technical expertise for what we're doing. So it's been really good.
I love that you all have kind of brought your own sort of experiences with, kind of falling on no-till, because it's a necessity for your farms, and you've brought those two things to one farm. So can you kind of give us a little bit more description on the sort of no-till method or methods that you all use? I mean, you mentioned the wood chips and the pathways and the mulching and those sorts of things. Can you kind of give us I don't know, is it as big as your operation is? Maybe it's hard to give like an overarching sort of philosophy or approach, but maybe you can give us the full rundown of how you sort of set up beds and those sorts of things?
The way we form a new field is sort of one topic, and then the way we maintain and flip beds in season is almost similar, but the other one. But anyway, yeah, I can see about it, and I'm sure Nate can fill in the gaps. We're opening new fields because we're seeing demand for more produce than we can grow. And also, since we're moving, part of our consolidation, we're moving the seed business here. So we opened up 2 fields, or 2 quarter-acre fields, at a more isolated corner of the farm, so that I can do some of the isolation work for seed. And so I'm calling them fields, but it's sort of a 100 by 100 square, and that would be a quarter-acre-ish. And the way we make them, that will end up being 20 100-foot beds on a 5-foot spacing. And so that'd be 30-inch of bed and 30-inch of pathway. And then we're opening a 3rd quarter-acre adjacent to our existing produce fields, and then more near there if it's sort of as time allows. And our no-till practice is really the deep compost method, and I think Daniel Mays puts it well that there's several ways to establish a field, and the way that we are choosing to is the initial tillage method, and the other ways would be like tarping for a long period of time before starting the bed to knock down any perennial weeds. But we're using the initial tillage method because we don't want to just start the bed to grow our crops. We want to shape it first. Nate mentioned that the water management has been really, really key. And so when we're thinking about a field, we're choosing a location that has some slope, or hopefully isn't totally flat, so that there's a way to shed the water, and is hopefully doesn't have like an awkward valley in it. The way the natural soil works is it doesn't take a very dramatic topography to hold water. You could practically drop a sandbag in your pathway and it'll hold water indefinitely. I guess a clay bag, a bag full of the ground. And so when we're making our field, we're very mindful of where the water's going to go. And so I like to think about it as water that's in your field needs to shed out of the field. And then water, once it's out of the field, needs to go someplace where it won't be harmful. And so when we're forming a new bed, our initial tillage, we have a spader that can do that work. And that's an opportunity to integrate any mineral amendments, any recommendation from a soil test, and some compost. And then after spading, we're able to shape our raised beds. And after this initial disruption of the soil, we should not ever need to disrupt it again after that point. We are filling our pathways with wood chips, and the wood chips, they're a source of carbon and organic matter. They're also holding the form of our raised beds, because we do shape them to have a little bit of size to them. I want to be sure that the water can flow from within the field to an outside edge. And if there's any undulations in that field, it's okay for there to be undulations on the tops of the bed, because all water is going to shed to the side. But we have to be mindful about any undulations in the pathway, because that will hold water. And so we'll hand dig out any problems that we see. And then wood chips go in there and they hold that form. And it's a place, it's a comfortable place you can walk. There's not weeds. It'll eventually become beautiful soil, and it'll make sure that the shape of the ground is correct for water to flow out. let's see. And then hopefully we're building this new bed at a time where then we can cover crop. It's sort of nice to cover crop before you cash crop. I think it's sort of a way to jumpstart life and soil biology. Cover crop's also a really good test. You know, if you can't grow winter wheat, you really can't grow carrots. The way I figure, like cover crops are really just easy crops. And so it's a good way to see that field for the first time. And if you see any problems, like, wow, for whatever reason, nothing's growing in that back corner, it's nice to learn that on something easy rather than something that you're kind of banking on. And then the field can sort of move into our regular management where we're using tarps for transitioning. So if a cover crop needs to be killed by a tarp, that's an option. Or if once we get into cash cropping, those can get smothered with tarp, or just as a way to keep weeds in check or to prevent the growth of weeds. This time of year, it's early December now. We're putting tarps over fields that we will be using in the spring, just to prevent that chickweed that will come in that time when it's warm enough for weeds to grow, but it's not yet warm enough to plant a crop. I'm drifting away from forming a new bed here, but
I want to know a couple things about that. One, I love the idea of the cover crop as a test crop. Like that's a really brilliant way of looking at them. Because they're an easy crop to grow, but if they're not growing, that means whatever's coming after them is not going to grow that well either. I love that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, what do you use to shape those beds? You mentioned shaping them after the spading. What is it? Are you using a specific implement for that?
Yeah, maybe I can speak to that.
Yeah,
I think when we think about creating new fields, the more sophisticated your mechanization, the faster and easier it is to stomach sort of that project. So what I've found is that some of the tooling that we had for tillage has lended itself to towards some of our no-till toolkits, and some things have really become obsolete. So sort of what that process looks like, Eric mentioned the spader. We have a 75 horse John Deere loader tractor that's sort of our main workhorse for materials handling. That also can run that big spader for that primary tillage. You could also get away with a ripper, like a chisel plow or something. We've used something like that in the past too. But so once the soil is loose, we have a 4-foot rototiller that I bought for some strip tillage that we played around with. Our flower field, our cut flower field, was sort of established as a strip till bed system where we cut those beds out of pasture, and we used a rototiller to sort of do that. And those are 4-foot beds. That's sort of one of the exceptions to our bed spacing in the fields. So I had this 4-foot rototiller, and then some neighbors were selling a just traditional bed shaper, which we sort of did some bartering to get off of them. I think it's a Buckeye bed shaper. And if conditions are perfect, that bed shaper in fluffy ground may make a pretty nice bed in 2 or 3 passes. And what I ended up doing was pulling the shaper pan off of the bed shaper and mounting it behind the rototiller, because I had seen some designs where people sort of had custom made shaper pans behind rototiller that looked like it funnels, that freshly tilled soil really nicely. And so I just sort of modified these 2 tools to work together. And in a single pass, in the right conditions, it really effectively makes a very precise 30-inch bed in a pass or 2, using sort of some heavy-duty tillage to get there. But once you're there, you're really never touching those beds with tillage again. And so that's sort of the shaping process. And then really quickly as we can, we're following that up to try and get that bare disturbed soil covered. So for wood chips, what we have is at first we were moving things out with wheelbarrows and shovels and trying to use the tractor if we could to move materials around. And we share a dump trailer with a neighboring farm, and it sort of fit nicely in the wheel spacing to fit in our pathways. And so what I did was I put a sort of a baffle in the middle of the back of the dump trailer vertically, so it sort of leaves two spaces on either side for material to come out. And we pull that dump trailer with a tractor down the beds, and at the end of the bed, we start tipping the dump trailer up, and we've got that trailer filled with wood chips, and sort of using a bit of fancy driving and a bit of raking and some handwork, we can pull out 5 or 6 yards of wood chips into 2 pathways at a time, and that has been a pretty labor-intensive but effective way to move wood chips around the field in a hurry, especially because some of our fields are a quarter mile away from sort of the main farmstead where we're getting all our materials from. So it's nice to be able to move volume of materials at a time. So we're sort of using that dump trailer to bring materials into the pathways. And then for compost, for sort of that mulching, that final.
Oh, Nate, before you move on.
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to mention that, like last winter, we were thinking, we want to wood chip all of our pathways, and it was like 200 plus beds. With some quick napkin math, it quickly was like 1,000 yards of wood chips, and so that sort of informed the decision to need to mechanize moving these. If you need to move 10 yards of wood chips with some wheelbarrows, that's one thing. But if it's 1,000 yards, you really want some equipment helping. And I just wanted to mention that sort of scale.
Yeah, that's great.
Actually, and I guess I'm doing this a little backwards. One thing we found in our earliest field that we sort of did this wood chip pathway thing, we had put all these wood chips down and then we added compost. We were actually having some trouble with wood chips spillover onto our beds, and we had gotten some I just happened to know it was black walnut wood chips, which what we noticed was that the compost, that we could spread on the bed would actually sit in places on top of a little bit of wood chip spillover from the pathway. And we were having some real issues on the edges of the beds where plants were sort of growing on this thin layer of compost and then having to penetrate through, a little bit of wood chip matter. And we're really having some issues getting crops growing on the edges of our beds. So what we're doing now is we're actually putting our compost down first, and then we're doing any wood chip work in the pathways afterwards. And that way, if we do have wood chip spillover, we can rake it out of the beds and know that we're not incorporating those wood chips into our growing space. And it really isn't a huge issue that we've found to have wood chips in the pathway. In fact, I think it's improving over time, the quality of our soil and the edges of the beds. But in that initial sort of application, if you're trying to grow crops over wood chips, it doesn't work very well. So that's sort of a shift in order we've done is now we're spreading compost sort of on bed tops before we do any wood chip work, so we can keep the wood chips out of the beds. Yeah, but basically for compost application, then to finish covering those beds, we were using that same loader tractor with about a yard bucket scoop and driving on that sort of pathway space, straddling the bed, and then 1 or 2 people with shovels would shovel out of the bucket of the tractor and going about, a half mile an hour in reverse, you could shovel out a bucket of compost in about 5 minutes and cover a whole bed. And that worked for a long time. And we did, I think we established most all the beds on the farm in that way. But it is a 2 to 3 person job, and it was becoming an issue, in our further outfields. All the travel time to go take that scoop of compost was really adding up when you've got 2 people sort of waiting for the next load. And there's some raking, hand raking that can be done in that time, but it felt like it was sort of a bottleneck, especially when the tractor was needed for other things and people were needed for other things. And so we were really excited about this, that compost spreader. There's a farm up near Nova Scotia. I think you shared it, Jesse.
Broad Fork Farm.
The video. Broad Fork Farm. So we actually have been talking to Dan at Community Machinery for about a year to try and get a compost spreader from him. And but with COVID and some international restrictions, we really sort of were striking out at getting a spreader from Dan, the guy who made that spreader for Broad Fork Farm. And that was sort of disheartening because we were planning on buying that this past spring. And so we sort of spent another season hand shoveling compost. And then a neighboring farm, who's pretty quick on the uptake, who we've been trying to hustle into moving towards a no-till system. And they're a largely U-pick farm working on a larger scale, did a really innovative tool up with a manure spreader, where they basically built a box on the back of a manure spreader to sort of contain the fling of the material. And then they built some clever baffles in the bottom to sort of band the material coming out. And that was relevant for them because they were doing strawberries and some things. Their spacing was a little different, but seeing how they had modified a manure spreader really got me puzzling. And so the challenge that we had was, when we established all our fields, we had a relatively small turnaround space at the end of the field. When you're working with mostly 3-point implements, you can drive a pretty big tractor and whip it around at the end if you can pick up your implement. But something like a manure spreader that's sticking out 20 feet from the back of a tractor gets a lot harder to turn around when you're trying to precisely drive over a bed. And so I've been scratching my head about this for a while, and then came across the smallest manure spreader I'd ever seen that was PTO driven. And it's a Rhoda 50, and it's only about maybe 10 feet long from front to back. And we have a small Kubota cultivating tractor that's also fairly short and nimble. And it felt like a bit of a gamble, but that we could potentially use that small of a manure spreader to be able to access in our field, because we have relatively small headlands to turn around in. And so that was sort of the critical piece, was finding a really small manure spreader that matched the wheelbase of our beds. And we built a box on the back of that to contain sort of the spread of the manure. And that Kubota, it's an offset L245 cultivating tractor that we had bought when we were doing a lot of tillage stuff, and was quickly becoming obsolete. We hadn't used it all year, but then it has a funny Japanese 3 PTO speed design, and so and with a bunch of creeper gear options. And so what was sort of neat with the manure spreader and the PTO drive is that we could really dial in our application rates. And so we were able to figure out the setting to basically match exactly the compost application rate that we wanted for a bed to do in a single pass. And so that was sort of really transitional for us, because we were able to now move material onto the fields entirely with tractors, with little to no handwork, really quickly. And with the spreader now, we're also able to sort of match, we're able to drive the material out with our loader tractor and meet the spreader sort of halfway. And it's really cut down on the amount of time that we spend doing that initial bed prep, or just bed prep even in season, because no one has enough time in the day. And so if you can cut your sort of prep activities, it's cut it more than in half to be able to move material onto those fields using these sort of clever mechanizations. And that's really freed up a lot of labor for more important tasks like harvest and fulfillment and sort of value adding to the farm. So that's sort of our tooling for getting materials onto the farm.
Yeah. That's actually I don't know who's doing this interview. That's actually a good segue to like how we do our bed slips, like in season.
Perfect.
I think that's where you want to go with this, right?
Perfect.
One of your, I'm spacing on the name right now, but one of the other farms that you interviewed, they had some sweet arrangement where they were growing for a food bank, total dream. But they described their bed flip as ABC, Amendment Broad Fork Compost, and we really appreciated that that terminology, because it's just very simple to describe, and that's what we've been following in season. And so we'll however we transition from one crop to the next, which could be tarping to smother, or it could be pulling the crop out or cutting it or mowing it or whatever. But once we've got our bed ready, we'll apply an amendment, which we try to keep as just a single recipe that we use. And for us, it's some gypsum and sulfur and some pelleted poultry nitrogen fertilizer. And then we're just applying that with out of 5-gallon buckets, walking by hand and just sort of spreading that. And then we broad fork. And we're certainly looking forward to a day where broad forking isn't as necessary, but right now the natural soil is still so heavy that going through and giving that little lift and having a chance to sort of feel the condition of the field still feels really important. And then compost, C, is just like Nate described. We used to just do it out the tractor bucket, but now we're using that modified manure spreader, which really makes it a breeze. And then I get a chuckle too when we, at this time of year, when we want to do tarping after our preparation, because we want to have a bed ready, and then we'll put a tarp over it just to sort of suspend it and to keep any weeds from growing in it. So then that becomes ABCD, and the D is for DARP. Which I guess fits our silly sense of humor here. But and so as a team, every Monday we do a field walk, and we'll identify all sorts of things that need to be done on the farm, from harvest to bed prep issues. And we're generally identifying like, oh, this week here's the beds that are they're done with harvest, they're ready to go. And that sort of forms a list for a team that, myself or Nate will be involved in. And then the other members of the team that are more focused on harvesting and marketing are paying attention to what's coming on and what's ready. And that's sort of how we've been managing our week-to-week operations. But it's been really critical to be able to do things quickly, do those bed turnovers quickly, and also to be able to communicate clearly, what we want done. Because the benefit to having 5 of us is we have this sort of experience and creativity and just energy of the 5 of us. But I think we're finding that communication is also so critical to operating a farm smoothly. And that's part of why I like just that simple ABC is it's easy to say, you know what it means, and you know how to do it. And so just ABC and a list of where can really communicate to the team easily.
something that's happening right now that's a little more behind the scenes that's really critical to all this work is all the planning that's happening right now around those crop placements for next year. And so, as a team, we sort of had our crop planning goals meeting fairly recently, and now it's been Jill and Michelle had been working on this massive puzzle, which is how do we fit all the crops and rotations that are planned for next year into those fields. And so what's really unique about the no-till system, we found is it's allowed us to be much more nimble with placement and multi-cropping. And so the way I like to think of it is we don't necessarily have a definitive plan for how we're going to flip a bed once it's completed, but we know we can either plan some space in the crop plan ahead of time, where there might be 4 weeks or 6 weeks where we know we have the option to tarp. But mostly we just know what's coming next. And so as a crop is coming to harvest, we then as a team can look at it, make a transition plan, and enact that transition plan really quickly and effectively. And that sort of let us be nimble on such a scale to figure out, if a bed is coming off really clean, often we'll sneak a cover crop in, or make sort of an on the fly decision based on the condition of the bed that lets us not have to have all that information planned ahead of time, but lets us sort of be adaptable for keeping the production rolling as the season goes. And tarps are usually sort of the fail safe. They work really well, but it's also kind of given us some tools, knowing that we can do some of that bed flip really quickly with ABCing. We also have been able to play a little more with quick cover crops in season. If it feels like we've got 2 or 3 extra weeks, we might just broadcast some buckwheat or seed in some buckwheat or a different crop real fast, just to keep something growing in those beds, and then be able to do a really fast turnover, with flail mowing and maybe just a little bit of compost on top, and depending on what the next crop is, we can really get away with having crops in the ground a lot more of the season, which is really pressing for us, since there's obviously some cost benefit to doing intensive cover cropping as you're doing no-till, because it eats up cash crop space. So all the speed of these transitions has really let us do more of that, if not less.
Hey, first, I went back and listened to that episode again, and yes, indeed, it was gaining ground, but that's a really good conversation overall if you have not heard it. We talk about hedgerows and movable tunnels and all sorts of good stuff. It's episode 29 from season 2. So yeah, go check that out. Second, while I have you, let's get a word from our sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes NOP-compliant living potting soils in Cleveland, Ohio, with food scraps they haul and compost themselves. Each batch of soil is tested against competitors, and the results are in. Plants vote for Tilth Soil. You can find out more at tilthsoil.com. And I want to add, I've used this potting mix and it is exceptional. And I will use it again. It's a great product. Learn more again at tilthsoil.com. Today's show is also brought to you by you, the listeners. You all are so incredible. If you like the show, if you appreciate the work we are doing here with the No-Till Market Garden podcast at No-Till Growers, with the No-Till Flowers podcast, or some of the other stuff that you haven't heard or seen coming up in 2021, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Eric Page, Ed Glazebrook, Earth Care Farmer Jane Murner Cynical, Asia Smith, Scott Snodgrass, Andrew and Haley Keeler of Avoda Sustainable Acres, Jody Miller, Shane and Emma of Aslan Organics, Tony Lopez, Clement, Thomas Eliason, Travis and Heidi of Arcadia Acres, Judson Taylor, John Mills, Grown Up Farm, Jacob Arthur, Clara Coleman, Wild Mountain Seeds, Bob and Ann Patton, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Dan Brisebois, C. Small, Jay McCombs, Tim Baldwin, Marc-Andre Giroux, Esoterra Culinary, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Jean-Martin Fortier, Yannick Laplante, Jen Lawrence, Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, and Veggie Cropper. Thank you to all of our show supporters. All right, back to the interview.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sort of systematizing, make it simple and fast, and so that everybody can kind of grasp it pretty quickly. So I want to get a few crop details, especially because we never kind of get to see the full, season on something like a seed crop. So I'm wondering if you all could take us through maybe one or two seed crops. We mentioned talking maybe about lettuce and carrots. Do you want to take us through one or both of those from start to finish, kind of how everything from spacing to kind of determining what you're looking for and how you're culling plants and all of those things? I'd love to hear those details.
Sure. Lettuce is a good one to talk about because it's sort of fun to take something that's normally just a leafy green and take it all the way into bloom and seed. And so as a seed crop, we grow that. We try to grow it in its like prime time spring production. And so for us, that would be like a late March or an early April transplant. Doing a plug tray transplant, or a paper pot, both work pretty well. And when we're growing for produce, we do lettuce on 4 rows in a 30-inch bed, and I think it's 9 or 10-inch spacing in those rows, which is pretty tight. And you can start your seed crop like that, but you eventually want to thin that crop down to 2 rows in the bed and just between a foot and 18-inch in row. So much, much greater spacing for the plant, because you want to let the plant get much larger, be able to have good airflow as it bolts. And so an option for a grower is to plant at whatever your ideal produce spacing is, and then thin it down to your seed spacing. And then those thinnings are marketable. And that thinning is also an opportunity to do any roguing, which is sort of how you do quality control for a seed crop. You're roguing or removing anything that's off type in terms of color or appearance or vigor or flavor. And so that it's helpful then to have a larger population to whittle down to a smaller one. And so if you do that sort of prime spring growing, for us that generally means like a early June harvest of that produce. And unfortunately, that tends to be a time where you don't need a lot of extra produce lettuce because everyone's got it right then. So we'll just sort of adjust our produce plans accordingly, knowing that we could be getting stuff from the seed field as well. And then once you've thinned it down to your seed spacing, and gotten to a place where you're no longer doing any selection, any roguing, so the plants that remain in the field are the ones that you intend to contribute their genetics to your seed harvest, you're really at a point where if you choose to, you can mulch that crop, and it should be pretty low maintenance. Lettuce bolts to 3.5, 4 foot tall. It does these dull yellow flowers. They aren't very showy, but it attracts a lot of crawling insects. It is one of those crops that's I find really fascinating how much diversity of pollinators. I think a lot of times people get hung up on the domestic honeybee as a pollinator, and that's great. But there's such a world of pollinators, and lettuce shows a lot of surprising diversity in what visits it. And then it will set seed. Usually that's about the month of August for us, maybe late July. And it sort of has a feathery tuft on it like dandelion does. And when it's ready to harvest, you should be able to lightly knock the plant we use a 5-gallon bucket. And so careful not to break it, because they can be kind of rigid and brittle then. But we just knock the seed into the bucket, and the mature seed should fall off easily. And with lettuce, we do successive harvest, where we'll harvest twice a week for as long as a month. And it will continually produce seed kind of in an indeterminate manner. And then usually the plant either just tuckers out, or you have a rainstorm, a summer storm that just flattens it, and it doesn't like being wet in the late part of its life cycle. So that's lettuce. And then I thought there was some interest in talking about a biennial as well.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about carrots, but can I pause for a second and ask? So once you're getting those lettuce seeds into the 5-gallon bucket, I mean, certainly you're dropping some seed, so you're creating some amount of weed issue. Are you managing those fields a little bit different than you're doing your vegetable fields? Like, in terms of, are you just tarping those fields as your sort of management practice for dealing with the with the essentially weed seed that you're growing?
So there's never a scenario when you get all the seed, and I would joke that you don't need a record of your field map for seed work, because it comes up as a volunteer in bands wherever you grew it. I've found that vegetables make pretty flimsy weeds. It's hard to get too afraid of lettuce as a weed. They kill, a tarp will kill it so easily. It's easily smothered. It's just not, if I was growing seed crops of bindweed and, something nasty like a supervillain, then maybe, but I haven't found it to be much of an issue, but it is something to be mindful of. So if you were following a seed crop with, let's try and come up with an example with something like
a baby green or something. Well, I guess that would work, and I guess that would work with lettuce, but
it almost can work sometimes. But if you wanted the baby green to be a brassica mix that people maybe were going to wilt, you would want lettuce in there because it's not really a cooking green. I don't know. So there, a little bit of mindfulness could make sense, but it would be very easy to put a tarp over that for a week and then put another inch of compost down, and you wouldn't have very much coming up.
Okay, yeah. So I do want to hear a biennial, because I think those are kind of confusing for a lot of people. Like, how do you save carrot seed, something like carrot seed? Like, how do you do that and know that the carrot seed that you're saving is one that you like the taste of, for instance? Like, how does that work?
Oh yeah, the flavor check is a little tricky because you do have to damage the root. Let me do the whole quick spiel on it, and we'll touch on that when we get there. But yeah, carrots a biennial, like a lot of our roots, like beets and onions, and then a lot of our fall brassicas, the cabbage and that whole family. And what it means to be a biennial is it's a 2-season seed crop. And so we'll grow these as a fall crop, as a produce crop. So for carrot, you could grow it early, but then you'd have to store it longer. So it makes the most sense to consider your fall produce carrots for your seed crop. And you just grow them just like you would normally, normal spacing, normal timing, normal conditions. And then when you harvest, just like with the lettuce, you want to have much more carrots than you intend to save for seed, so that you can do a nice selection. It's particularly important with roots. Roots tend to not like that smooth cylindrical shape that we want them to be in. they want to be kind of wild and forked to make better contact with the soil. But we want that smooth shape so that they're easy to rinse the dirt off and cook with. So that observation is important. So you dig them, you do your selection, you find your prettiest ones, and then you'll store them over the winter, which really is the same process of just a very long storage in your cooler as a market grower. I like to just pack them in a nylon, like woven sandbag type thing, something that can breathe but will hold the moisture pretty well. And then you're replanting them in the spring, and that's your opportunity for checking flavor. You could do it in the fall before you put it in storage, but I prefer to not wound them at that early part of their storage. And so in the spring, when I'm about to replant those carrots, you can nick the tip off of them just with a knife. You don't need the whole carrot. All you really need is that growth plate on the top, between where the root part of the carrot is and where the greens will grow out of it. And so you can nick a piece of the bottom of that carrot root out, and that's an opportunity if there's any coloration you want to observe inside the root. But that's also a time when you can have a snack. And then those carrots are placed back in the ground. It's kind of like planting potatoes or garlic, where you're just stuffing them in there. And the spacing, I use 1 foot spacing, 2-row per bed. Carrot's an odd one because carrot will cross-pollinate with Queen Anne's lace, which is everywhere here. And so generally it's not grown as a seed crop in this part of the country. I get around that by growing that in the front yard of my house in town and counting on the neighbors to mow their lawn. It might not be perfect, but we've been doing it for 8 years now, and we get great seed from it. So it's working well enough. The other option would be using some kind of isolation cage with an introduced pollinator. And that sounds like a lot of fuss to me. So I don't do it that way. And then carrots in their second year. So we plant them early. I've planted them as early as February, but March or early April is a little bit more reasonable. It's sort of as early as any, like when you would plant your peas. And then that's another crop that lends really well to mulching. They'll come up out of the soil, and they've got a lot of energy since they've got that whole root to draw from. Carrot will get 5 feet tall pretty easily. It has beautiful flowers. It blooms like Queen Anne's lace does, but it tends to be a little bigger and a little earlier than the weedy crop. If you had no interest in growing carrot for seed at all and simply wanted to plant it as a pollinator, that whole umbel family is just amazing for drawing all kinds of beneficial pollinators and very diverse. They have a shallow flower structure that is, I guess, friendly to a lot of different species of insects that are looking for pollen. So yeah, even if you weren't interested in seed, you could grow it just for the flowers. And then the harvest for carrot, once the seed is fully formed and started to dry down, that's usually in July at some time. That's the quick version.
Nice. I love that. And I love those nerdy details. Well, Nate and Eric, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we could probably spend hours talking about all the different things that you all are doing. There's so many great things. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
You're
really
welcome.
Appreciate the podcast.
It was great.
Something I just realized, and I don't know if they went into it when you talked to Michelle, Hannah, and Jill. When we were deciding to form our collective, the farm, us all working together, taking the trip down to Kentucky and going to your no-till seminar with Daniel Mays, and then we also did some rock climbing. That was like what cemented the deal. We were all talking last fall, like, oh, we should do this thing, and then it was like a corporate retreat. We did like, we went to the no-till session, and we did some rock climbing. That was like a team building exercise, I guess. It was, but that's in my mind the kickoff to our collaborative venture. So appreciate you organizing and setting the stage in that way.
That's awesome to hear. I feel like we'll definitely be doing more of those in the future. People don't know this yet, but they'll know it by the time this podcast airs, is that Hannah and I are moving. And we're moving to a farm that may be slightly more conducive to having a bunch of people over. Because that was, it was just like, it was kind of hard to get all the people back here. But we're moving like this month. So over the course of the next month, we're moving to a new farm that'll be a little bit more conducive to having those events. So maybe we'll have more events, and from that will be spawned more collaborative farms.
Fantastic. Cool. Well,
awesome.
Hope that goes well. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Green Things on Instagram and all the places, and we will hook it up with links in the show notes. Also, make sure you are subscribed to our brand new podcast, No Till Flowers, with host Ginny Love of Love and Fresh Flowers. Ginny is amazing, and there is just so much great insight there. Make sure you are also subscribed to this podcast, wherever you are getting it, and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must describe, if you could choose anyone in the world, who you would want to start a collaborative farm with. Me? I don't know, maybe Santa? I mean, having access to that delivery system. Big thanks, as always, to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin. Big ups to my music guy, Willie Breeding. Thank you, as always, to Hannah Crabtree for all of the million things that she does in my world. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Interesting. Let me see. Where's the speaker on this thing?
Did it come with it has the boom? It's coming out of it.
Bar.
Speaker bar. Does it have that?
I'm figuring it out. Is that better?
Oh, that sounds better.
That sounds better. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was an antenna.
Nice. Well, that's going at the end of the credits, right? That's too good.
If that's the dumbest thing I say this hour, I'll be fine with that.